Happy Friday. Happy weekend to everybody out there. This is Freology Friday, where we grow in real time. And I
Yeah,
am Derrick Day, and he is.
I am Aaron Tomlinson.
Yes, you are. And it is good to see you. You're
Likewise.
looking fantastic, my brother.
Thank you. I'm feeling good too. I'm looking forward to summer.
Yep. You and me both.
Yeah.
So before we get down the road, what's in the glass tonight?
Yeah, I had this last week or 2 weeks ago. I can't remember, but it's sour green apple schnapps and caramel vodka.
Yep.
So
I've got to try
caramel
that.
appletini on the rocks.
Yeah, we need to put that in the book too, in the mixology book. Which, by the
Yeah.
way, folks, that's coming. And you want to tell them about the book? You want me
No,
to
you
tell
go
them?
ahead, man. You've been putting most of the work into it.
Well, we've been talking about writing a book, and so our friend Daryl Carlson gave us the inspiration for the title, and so the title of the book is "Growing in Real Time." And it's a book that Aaron and I have written together. I've been kind of assembling all of our thoughts and writings and all of that together, and so it's sitting in Aaron's mailbox right now.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
it's
But we should
it's
get it out
it's.
quickly.
Go ahead, man.
Oh,
I'm
I was
sorry.
just going to say we should get it out in the next few months for sure.
Yep, yep. But it's in a good state of writing. Just need to go through and fine tune some points, maybe a bit of editing, but for the most part, it's going to be about 70,000 words of growing in real time.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm excited about that.
I am too. It's going to be awesome.
Yep. So that being said, what's in my glass tonight? I went to Popeyes today and got some mango lemonade, and to that I added vodka and some cayenne powder. So I channeled my inner Aaron today, and it's not exactly mango habanero, but it's mango cayenne, and it has an awesome kick to it. And this too will be in the Freology Mixology book.
Yeah.
So you'll be able to drink like Aaron and Derrick.
I love that. So why
Well,
don't you introduce our topic as well, Derrick?
I sure will, man. I'll be delighted. And this tonight's topic is freedom.
Mhm.
Freedom. What is freedom? And what is the difference between real freedom and perceived freedom?
Mm.
And there's a lot to peel back here. I mean, this is a real onion of a subject. And by onion, I don't mean like stinky yellow onions. I mean like a sweet Vidalia onion, because uh, there's a lot. Let me just say this: that freedom is a wonderful thing. I mean, when you are free to think freely, free to speak freely, free to act freely, it's liberating.
Mhm.
It's liberating. And the reality is that there is, let me say this, that freedom is also, it's very objective. There is a state of being free and a state of not being free,
Mhm.
but it's also very subjective,
Mhm.
because there are degrees of freedom, and there are areas where you think you're free and you're not, and areas where you don't think you're free and you are. So I want to kind of dig into this a little bit, and I want to start by saying that freedom. What is a working definition of freedom? Freedom is the ability to think, speak, and move without inhibition.
Mm.
That's a good working definition
Yeah.
of freedom. Now, there may be a better dictionary definition, and Aaron, you might have a definition, but that's when I think about freedom, that's what I think about. How can I express my thoughts, express my intent in words or express myself in action without inhibition. And we're gonna discover too in this conversation that freedom, although it seems like it's something that lends itself to absolutes, is very nuanced and very there are layers.
Yeah.
There are layers. And so with that, Aaron, I'm going to kick it over to you.
Yeah, perfect. So I looked up, how some other people thought about freedom, particularly in the psychological realm or philosophical realm. And I came across this. I really like this. And I'll just read this real quick. It says, freedom as described by German social psychologist and humanist philosopher Erich Fromm is the final goal in the process of individuation. Fromm's concept of freedom is close to David Shapiro's concept of autonomy, which is becoming an independent agent in the world, exactly what you were just saying. It encompasses a capacity to manifest what makes you uniquely yourself. So I think that gets into the subjective aspects of it.
Yep.
It encompasses a capacity to manifest what makes you uniquely yourself, listen to this, without recourse to either self-absorption or self-abnegation. So,
abnegation?
Yeah, abnegation meaning negation, or the Christian thing, disowning yourself, disavowing yourself,
dying to self.
Yourself. Yeah, disowning yourself, self-negation. So without going too far into self-absorption, to where you're probably not free because you're self-absorbed, right? So you're not free to think about other people or act in ways that might be beneficial to a group because you're self-absorbed. So that's its own form of bondage, right?
Yep.
And then without going into abnegation, which is I'm disowning myself, I'm giving myself up, I'm taking up my cross, all that good stuff. So I really liked that, the nuance. You talked about freedom being a nuanced topic. I really liked thinking about it in that way. And then the second thing that I would add is that freedom, and this is research based. This isn't just Aaron's opinion. Freedom comes, or what comes with freedom is a lot of anxiety. Because when you have the freedom to act and make your choices, because like we've talked about before, none of us has a crystal ball. We're all living life looking backwards, basically, meaning we can only see where we've been. We can't see where we're going completely. And so when you have a bunch of choices, psychologically, you can start thinking about all kinds of perceived consequences to your choices, or have anxiety about the outcomes to your choices because you're acting as a free moral agent. And that can be a very scary thing. Thus why a lot of people want to give up their freedom in order to be told what to do. So therefore comes the appeal of authoritarianism or control and manipulation from other people or from systems, or in the case of religion, from a book, right? God knows the plan, God knows all, so I'm just going to do what he tells me to do. Because if I'm left to my own devices to make my own choices, that's scary. And then the other side of anxiety that comes with it is, if we look at freedom as the ability to live your uniqueness, well, if you're going to be unique, you have to stand out from the crowd. Otherwise, uniqueness is what separates you from the crowd, right? So that takes a tremendous amount of courage, because there can be a lot of social consequences and various different things that go along with that. So with freedom, and the freedom to choose and the freedom to act and the freedom to be unique, also comes quite a bit of psychological anxiety. So I thought that was really interesting and makes sense as to why people are so willing to just become automatons to authoritarian figures or government or religion, things like that.
So what what you're saying is that sometimes that there are some people that that conflate a form of servitude with freedom.
Mm-hmm.
That's, and let me say this because political ideology is a
Hmm.
big thing right now,
Yep.
and this is something that I've learned. This is something I've gathered about myself. I shared this with my sister earlier that that the minute you become galvanized in an ideology, in a philosophy, in a religion, you cease to be free,
Hmm.
irrespective of how free you think you are. I, you know, I saw this thing once and I made a meme out of it. It was a sign from a church sign. It said, "Christ has freed us to serve and obey." And so I put a Rick and Morty clip in there that said that just sounds like slavery with extra steps.
Yeah.
And that's one of these things where freedom is highly subjective, right?
Mhm.
Because let me say this: I'm going to talk about myself so that I don't piss anybody else off. I'm just going to talk about me for a minute,
Mhm.
and it's this that for 3 years or so, I
Mhm.
considered myself a very staunch atheist. I was
Yep.
convinced that there is no God, no heaven, no hell, no religious absolute. And then something happened. I fell in love, and love will do funny things to
Funny
you.
things too. Yeah, for
Uh,
sure.
but it makes love will make you reconsider things that you thought that you had a handle on. So the thing was is that I realized that there is no absolute. And what I learned is that spirituality is a very fluid uh, dynamic,
Hmm.
and that one of the things that I think that we have to do in order to, if we're going to say we're free moral agents, that we have to say that we reserve the right to grow, change, and evolve. And that's freedom. When you can say, okay, yes, I had an absolutist position, but now not so much, not so much. And I think that that's a harbinger of freedom,
Hmm.
a key indicator of freedom. When you hold on to something loosely enough
Hmm.
that you can let it go to grab onto something else.
Hmm.
And I always use the analogy of ladder bars or monkey bars, that in order to go across a ladder bar obstacle, you have to let go of one bar to extend and reach to the other.
Hmm.
And that's so if we're looking at life as a journey, and we're looking as ladder bars as a metaphor for that, you have to be in the habit of progressively grabbing onto something and letting go of something else in order to move to the other side. So with that being said, I think that if we can get to the point where uh, and Aaron, this is something that you helped me out with. So I gotta really give you a shout out here, um, because you had said something to me when I was going through my militant atheism,
Yeah, you
and,
were
and you
militant.
and you were saying you weren't talking about me, and I know you weren't, but you
No.
were saying that there are atheists that are so dogged in their interpretation and their embracing of atheism that they're no different than fundamentalists.
Hmm.
And when you said that, and again, this is before me falling in love, uh, which I love you, man. You're my
Yeah.
bromance.
Yeah, for sure.
But anyway, even before that, that helped me to reevaluate what I thought. And so there were things like you were teaching on consciousness and things like that. And I realized that there's still more to it than what I thought. So I say, I'm going to say this, and I won't say that I'm completely free, and I'll explain that as we get down in the conversation. I'm not totally free, but this is an area where I am free.
Hmm.
I'm free ideologically. I'm free philosophically. I'm free spiritually because I don't hold on to anything tightly. I'm able to let go and keep it moving. And that's so if I could share this with anybody that's watching or listening right now, that if you have a position, also hold on to the possibility that your position may be wrong,
Mhm.
or that there may be more to it than what you perceive or understand, because as long as you do that, you're able to let go of one bar and reach for the next one.
Yeah. Important element of freedom, right? Because you can be in bondage to your own mindsets. So it's the freedom to change your mind.
Yeah.
It's not like we get people in general. So I'm just speaking as human beings. This is something we do as human beings. We get defensive in general about the things that we hold on to that really help us make sense of our lives. And you have to be able to make sense of your life. Everybody has to be able to make sense of their life. They have to be able to tell a story. If you can't do that, if you can't make sense of your life and you can't tell a story, that is, in some sense, not in a clinical sense, but that is almost the definition of insanity. Like, if you don't know who you are, if you don't have a story, if you can't make sense of your own life, then you're very susceptible to the cheese falling off the cracker, if you know what I mean. Like literally losing your mind. I think that's what it means to lose your mind. I have no sense of who I am anymore. I have no sense of significance, no sense of meaning. So we have to be able to make sense out of our lives. That being said, this is why dogmatism it doesn't work. You can be as dogmatic as you want about any precept you want to be dogmatic about, any idea you want to hold to. You can think everybody should follow this path, everybody should think like this, but it never works, because some people will look at our ideas and not be able to incorporate those ideas in a way that allows them to preserve the sense that they have about their own life. It's why people are so resistant to facts, right? Like, you can present really solid evidence that the Bible is not the inerrant word of God by just doing just internal textual criticism and showing, like, I remember, I was deconstructing with my congregation, or I was taking them through deconstruction. I don't know how smart that was in hindsight, but it was authentic. And I remember taking just the Christmas story in Matthew and the Christmas story in Luke and trying to chart out the story and make it make sense in both accounts. Mm-hmm. And it's impossible. Same thing with the resurrection in all four of the Gospels, but also with the flood. You can take the story of the flood and you can parse out two completely different stories. That one says it rained for 40 days, another says it rains for like 6 months. Right. One says there was one pair of each animal, another says there were 7 pairs of clean animals and 1 pair of unclean animals. Yep. And so what I did was I parsed that out in the scripture and I handed it out to the congregation on a Wednesday night. And I said, I want you to read these 2 stories and tell me which one's actually in the Bible. And most people went with the 40 days one because that's what we've been taught over and over and over again, right? And then I opened up the scripture and showed them how both stories are in there, and you can't make sense out of them. So here's what I'm saying. It's very easy, without going into biblical scholarship, without going into archaeology, without going into how it's been copied over and over, or there are different manuscripts that say different things. It's very easy to just take a few key passages in the Bible that everybody knows and show them that there's no way that it can be without error, because it actually is contradicting itself in some respects. Right. Blatantly, openly. And I remember when we did the Christmas one, I think I was there. Our service would start at 7. We were usually done by 8:30. People hang around till 9. I think I was there till 10:30 with some people still trying to make the Christmas story make sense. Because in one version of the Christmas story, Herod is out to kill the babies and they go down into Egypt. In another version of the Christmas story, they go up into the temple to have, in Luke's version, to have Jesus circumcised according to the law. And then they go down and settle in Nazareth. So which is it? Did they go to Egypt or did they go up to the temple? And if Herod was trying to kill the baby, why in the heck would they go into Jerusalem where Herod was? You can't make it, you can't reconcile the stories. But we hold on to these things because we're so committed, because we have used the Bible or scripture or religion or whatever to make sense out of our lives, right? So the trick is, with what you're saying, Derrick, the trick is to be able to be open to new information while being able to incorporate that in a way that you can still make sense out of your life. And then also realize that everybody's unique in the way that they make sense out of their life. And so therefore we cannot be dogmatic about certain precepts because, frankly, for no other reason, it doesn't work. That doesn't mean you can't champion values, that you can't champion causes, that you can't strongly present and argue for your case. But when we get mad or we get discombobulated or we feel like we've got the one truth for everybody, it just doesn't work. And then what you're doing is you are inhibiting other people's freedoms, right? Which is what we see going on in America today in a lot of places.
Yeah. So let's talk about that for a second. Like, what are things that we do to influence, impact, or inhibit the freedoms of others? Because, here's the thing, that when we say, let me just say this, if I say I believe, or you say you believe in something,
right?
And you say I believe in this because this works for me. Now, you're not making it a moral absolute,
right?
You're not making this dogmatic. You're just saying, okay, I believe this works for me. Now, the minute that you say that you want to export that idea beyond the shores of the nation of Aaron,
right,
to the nation of others, or to say that this is not just what I believe, that this is a moral absolute. Now I've done something that could influence, impact, or inhibit the freedom of others. And this is one of the things that I think that we need to be careful of whenever an idea takes root in our life.
Yep.
Because like for example, I'm going to use abortion.
Yep.
As a case study here, because I have known people that were absolutely, positively opposed to abortion in any situation, circumstance, or context until it happened to them. That when something occurred in their life, and it could be anything. It could be like that a potential birth defect was revealed, or that that you happen to hold on to some racist tenets, and your child or you might be pregnant by someone of another race. All of these different, there are a lot of different things why people have abortions, or or it just could be like financial issues, right? So now you get to this and you say, okay, I'm absolutely opposed to abortion, but now when I'm faced with it, I'm going to move the goalposts,
right?
Right. Or to pick on another show that we did, that we're going to engage the Overton window.
Yep.
And slide the bar up just a little bit to include more of what we think, so that we can force embracement of a societal norm.
Yep.
And in these cases, right? What I'm thinking is that when we hold on to something, I mean, like, let me give you an example. Let me use another example, right? I happen to have an affinity for German cars. I like German cars, and I think that by and large, German cars are better than any other nation's cars. Now, if I say I believe that, and I vote with my pocketbook and buy, BMWs, Porsches, Audis, whatever, right? No harm, no foul. But when I say that German cars are superior at the expense of, say, Fords or Chevys, now I may be overstepping. In other words, I'm trying to use my influence or exercise or expand my sphere of influence to um, to influence or impact the buying habits of others.
Hmm.
So in doing that, I'm trying to limit their freedom by trying to proselytize them into this nationalistic automotive paradigm that I have.
Hmm.
And again, I think that that is not a proper application of freedom
Hmm.
because um God, what is it? There's something something that Paul wrote about not letting your liberty ah help me out. Do you remember that one?
Don't let your liberty be used as a stumbling block for your brother. Are you thinking of that one?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you.
Yeah.
So again, that is akin to saying don't yell fire in a crowded theater.
Right.
Yeah, there's no one putting a hand over your mouth or a gag in your mouth to stop you from doing that. But by doing that, if you yell fire in a crowded theater, you may cause more problems than there actually is. And again, when we start saying, I'm going to say, or for example, like you say, okay, I like Burger King instead of McDonald's. I like Burger King instead of McDonald's. But then every time you meet somebody that says, hey, let's go to McDonald's. Oh God, that's disgusting. Why would you ever want to do that? Their food is terrible. It's unhealthy. And you start going down and now this person is like, what the fuck, man? All I wanted to do was just suggest someplace to eat. You know, these are ways that we abuse our freedom, or to exercise our freedom at the expense of others. That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I think where it's hard, because you bring up a couple things. I think where it's hard for people, and this is tricky. Like if it's just my personal philosophy of life, that's one thing. You know what I mean?
Yep.
When we talk about issues like we talk about abortion, and since you brought up McDonald's, I'm going to talk about vegans because vegans are another group that are passionate, proselyting, uh, dogmatic, fundamentalists. A lot of them, not all of them. If you're vegan
Not
out there,
all.
that's not you, but there's a lot of them. So I think it's when we care about the harm that's being done as a result, or at least what we perceive as a result of people having the freedom to make these choices. So here's what I mean. Abortion is a tough one. I think if anybody's honest about it, it's a tough one because women absolutely should have autonomy over their own bodies. Women should absolutely, at the very least, be able to make a medical decision with their doctor. And at the same time, it's difficult to think about the fact that whether you think, life begins in the womb or you begin it believes at conception, or you believe it begins when they take their first breath, or you believe it begins when they're two, whatever. Regardless, that is a potential life that will never be able to manifest, right? That will never be able to come out as a human being. So it's complex. So we can see harm being done from both perspectives on the issue. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So then we feel like we have to push our ideology on others to stop that harm. Same thing with vegans, right? I'm thinking about this today because I was talking with my family and I made a joke about, God, I don't want to be offensive. We were talking about fundamentalist vegans. Let's just put it that way. And I said, I don't know, man. Have you ever seen Nature? Oh, I know what it was. My son was talking about a woman who was trying to make her dog eat plants and trying to force her dog to eat plants. And I'm like, nature's a cruel place, man. Like, it is a cruel place. I mean, go spend some time out in nature, especially if you ever get a chance to, go spend some time in Africa and see the big five and watch, we had the opportunity to um, be on the Serengeti during the wildebeest migration.
Yeah.
And so you'd see these herds of wildebeest migrating, and then you'd see the pride of lions and all the other predators trying to get to them. And you just kind of realize after a while, like nature's a cruel place. And my wife chimed in and she said, yeah, but for a lot of vegans, it's not about the cycle of life, the food chain. It's about how corporations have exploited animals for financial gain and stuff like that. And so when you start to look at things from those more sort of social issue perspectives, then it becomes your duty. I'm not saying this is a reality. I'm nuancing the topic. It becomes your duty to export that belief system. You see what I'm saying? So that's different than I believe in God, I don't believe in God, or I think, cherries are better than strawberries, being a little bit facetious, but have a certain philosophy. I think it's when we look at these social issues and think this is harmful to this population, unborn babies or women who are pregnant, or the corporate greed and exploitation of animals and the way they're treated and the way they're slaughtered and the way they're raised and all of that stuff. And I think that's where it becomes more difficult for us to navigate this topic.
Well, no, you bring up a really good point, because like there are certain things that you absolutely should try to export. That when you're talking about the autonomy of women's bodies, when you start talking about race and racism, you start talking about the rights of people to express their sexuality and things like that. Yes, those are areas that you should speak up and you should try to export that as an ideal. I gotta throw something in here. Fun fact about wildebeest, because you mentioned wildebeest.
Yeah.
Because I remember one time, we were talking about starvation in Africa, and somebody's like, well, why don't they just eat wildebeest? There are plenty of them out there. And from what I've been told is that wildebeest taste absolutely terrible. I mean, they're absolutely wretched. And even predators, basically the only animal that eats wildebeest as a choice are hyenas.
Yeah.
And we know that hyenas really don't give a fuck, right?
Yeah.
but lions, cheetahs, it's like if they haven't eaten in a while, a wildebeest will make a good meal. But it's not going to be the first choice, which is why you have so many herds of wildebeest. They're so plentiful because nobody wants to eat them.
That is really interesting. That is really fascinating. Wow. I'm growing in real time.
So useless trivia. But another thing that I want to think about too is like freedom. I was told this once, and I've adopted it as a mantra. Freedom means free to be dumb. That
true.
And we did a show about this like once where we talked about when someone makes a decision, we don't particularly like it, but it doesn't really impact us. Should we say anything? And this is one of these things, like if it doesn't impact you, and let me say this because this is really important, because a lot of times we think of things as they impact us. As I was talking with someone today, and I was explaining to them that Donald Trump's tax cuts benefited me. It benefited me in a really great way. That doesn't mean that I'm going to go and vote for this guy, because what he means to everybody else is really bad news. So the thing is that when you think about freedom, you're free to be smart, but you're also free to be dumb. And sometimes freedom means having the ability to exercise your franchise against your own best interests. And I think that this is one of these things where, okay, on the one hand, we might say, okay, we need to take certain things out of the hands of people. because they could vote or make decisions against their own best interests, or make decisions against the better interests of others. But do you really want to do that? Because, freedom also, I think, has a slippery slope to it, that we could say, okay, well, let's just curtail the freedom on that one. And that's okay. Well, then you start thinking, okay, well, maybe let's do this and let's do this. And pretty soon you have a theocracy. So I was talking with our friend Jimmy Ligon earlier today, and we were talking about that in the 60s and 70s, Iran was a pretty happening place.
Yeah.
It was very progressive, very liberal, very forward thinking culturally, and all of that. And then you had the Shah of Iran, and then following his deposition, you had the Ayatollahs, starting with Ayatollah Khomeini. And when you basically you had somebody saying, Iranian women wearing mini skirts is a bad thing. Let's use that as a starting point, because there were some really hot Iranian women in the 60s and 70s. If you go back and look at the picture, the photographic record, you're like, wow, Iran was a really happening place. And somebody says, oh, well, I think that women wearing mini skirts is a bad idea.
Yeah.
Okay. So where does that go? Well, I think that maybe they should cover their arms as well. They should wear longer skirts and wear skirts to their knees. And they say, well, somebody has an ankle fetish, so we need to cover that up, and somebody's got a nose fetish, so we need to cover that up, and pretty soon, it's the burqa, right? And I'm not shitting on any Muslims out there. It's like, if you think that's good for religious reasons, good on you, mate. But it's from a societal standpoint, it really doesn't make sense, because what you're doing is you're inhibiting the freedom of someone in order to achieve some religious objective. So, where do we stop? In other words, what are the dams? What are the switches? What are the breakers that we want to implement to to curtail things that are potentially dangerous without inhibiting, impacting, or influencing someone's freedom?
Yeah. I think that's the trick, right? So let me ask you a question, because my mind is going in a million different directions. So let me see. I'm going to throw a few things out, and you tell me which one you want to focus on. We haven't really gotten to perceived freedom, to that part of it yet. So there's that. I'm really thinking about how algorithms and AI is going to make it more challenging to be free in our minds. I'm really thinking about that. That's probably a whole episode in and of itself.
Yeah.
And then the third one I'm thinking about, this goes back to something that you said at the very beginning, where you were talking about, you remember when we used to teach, freedom is not the freedom to do what you want, but it is the freedom to act in according to God's word, or according to God's will.
Yeah.
That whole concept of freedom is interesting to me. So I'm willing to explore any one of those three areas. Which one you want to focus on for?
Okay. Let's talk about the freedom to serve, the freedom to obey God's word.
Okay.
And the reason why I want to talk about that, because here in America, we say we're the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Yeah.
But there is a certain faction of American citizens that believe that the only freedom that there is freedom in Christ. So I want to explore that.
Okay. So yeah, the way we used the way we used to talk about it, for those that for the uninformed, those that are fortunate enough, um, we would talk about there's this real duality within humanity, that we have desires, and most of our desires are destructive. Most of our desires are sins. Most of our desires are going to bring us under the judgment of God, and we're in bondage to our desires. We're in bondage to sin. And Christ and the Holy Spirit and the work of believing the truth and all this stuff was supposed to free us from those desires so that we would not do them. Thus, as you said, Derrick, freeing us to serve Christ, or freeing us to make wholesome, or at least what we were told were wholesome, moral choices.
Yeah.
What's really interesting to me about this, and I've been interested in philosophy, kind of just, very much an armchair philosopher. It's not like I'm reading a philosophy book a week or even a month. But anytime I get a thought, I'll look at articles, I'll look at how was this thought about. So here's what I came across this in the freedom thing. So did you know that the Enlightenment thinkers, so if you go back, to the late 1700s,
Late 1700s,
I'm not sure exactly the time frames considered the Enlightenment, but that's actually how they thought about freedom. So it's helpful if we understand that really prior to the 20th century, I don't want to say the 20th century, maybe a little bit before that, but definitely during the Enlightenment period, the highest virtue was what you contributed to your society. So, today in Christian circles, for men specifically, you're taught that family's where it's at, right? Like if you're out doing something in society and you're sacrificing your family, you're out of order, right?
Yeah.
It hasn't always been that way. In the Enlightenment period, it was, if you're not out putting most of your effort forward into contributing to others besides your family,
the betterment of society,
you were considered immoral. And so these things shift, right? They culturally shift. So this whole idea of freedom in the Enlightenment period, that, those that opposed religion, generally, not all of them, their idea of freedom was that you'd be free from your desires so that you could serve the moral good and contribute to society, so that you could make moral choices in the face of opposition. So in other words, if the crowd was going a way that was immoral, I was free to take a stand and not be controlled by the crowd. And if my desires were leading me a different direction, I was free to say no to my desires and say yes to the moral choices. So much of what Christianity portrays as, this is how it is. God's word is settled forever in heaven. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will never pass away. And so therefore, this is how it is for all time. And yet, if you look at it historically and sociologically, they are just parroting whatever the predominant philosophies were in the Western world at the time.
So let me throw a monkey wrench in this, right?
Yeah,
because in the Enlightenment, what goes with the Enlightenment, like chocolate goes with peanut butter in a Reese's cup? Freemasonry. Freemasonry.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
And so the whole concept of Freemasonry was to have a moral compass without the guiding principle of a deity. That, now it's funny because, people will tell you that you can't be a Mason if you don't believe in a supreme being. Well, depends on the short answer to that one is it depends. But when we look at the Enlightenment, and the whole idea was how to improve yourself,
right?
The betterment of self, because this enlightened self-interest, which that was at the center of the Enlightenment, the enlightened self-interest would create an enlightened global society. So when we think about freedom essentially has to include the ability of the individual to pursue their own enlightened self-interest. Now, here's the catch, because we've talked about this before, like the difference between hurt and harm, right? You are free to pursue your own self-interest only to the point that it causes no harm.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that this is where freedom goes off the rails, right? Because if you say, well, I want, okay, let's talk about this. I'm going to throw something out here that's going to make some people mad. It's going to absolutely make some people mad. But you know what? Aaron, ask me if I give a fuck. Just ask me.
Do you give a fuck?
No, I don't. Zero fucks given. Here's the thing. Make America great again. What exactly does that mean? What does MAGA actually mean? And if you were to distill this, I mean, take all of the various components and functions of this and distill it into its essence, right? It would be America circa 1957.
Yeah.
America circa 1957. This is before Brown versus Board of Education. This is before the global desegregation of the military. This is before the Civil Rights Act, before the Voting Rights Act. And watch, let me throw something else out here. You know what the single most popular classic American automobile is? The
Chevrolet.
57 Chevy.
Yeah, I was going to guess Chevrolet.
The 57 Chevy represents the epitome.
Yeah.
It is the apex of what people think America is. And so when we start talking about, okay, like make America great again, right? You are saying that you pine for a period in American history where there was broad subjugation and disenfranchisement of entire swaths of people. Mm-hmm. Because if you want to say when was America great, right? Which, if you ask me, go ahead and ask me, Aaron.
When was America great, Derrick?
It never was. But if you ask your average MAGA adherent, when was America great? That is the point in time that they're going to. Mm-hmm. You know, so you're saying, okay, we want something that we think is going to make things better, but we completely dismiss or disabuse ourselves of the concept that this was really horrible for a whole lot of people. Mm-hmm. So anyway,
let me give you my perspective on this, and this is growing in real time. Which, by the way, thank you for sharing the Masonic connection, because I had not seen that. And that was enlightening for me, because, you know, we both know a little bit about Masonic orders and Masonic teachings. Yep. And so I'm gonna spend some time with that for a while. So thank you for sharing that. But you're absolutely right. It's the 1950s. And the reason I was like biting my lip was because what immediately I wanted to say is, well, if we want to make America great again in the 1950s, is let's just, for the sake of argument, because I agree with you about America. That's a very generalized statement, but that is the touchstone that people are looking at. That's the model of it, right? So let's just suppose, just for the sake of argument, that were true. Isn't that right after FDR's New Deal?
Yes. Well, not immediately after.
But I mean, it takes a few years for it to take effect, right?
Yeah, we're talking about a term and a half of Truman and 2 terms of Eisenhower.
So it takes. Yeah. Now you correct me if I'm wrong, because you know the details of this much better than I do. But you know, like when they were when the Feds were raising interest rates, one of the things that I learned was that it'll take about 18 to 24 months for just a half a percentage hike or percentage hike in the interest rate to actually impact the average person, right? So theoretically, and I don't know all the legislation that was passed or whatever with the New Deal, but there was a certain economic structure, let's just say, in America that empowered unions, empowering the
Yep.
worker, putting
Yep.
greed in check, higher taxes on corporations, which would give them incentive to spend more perhaps on their employees. Because,
Raising the top income tax bracket.
yep.
Yeah.
So wouldn't it make sense? And I'm being a little bit facetious, but who fucked that up? I think we know.
Yeah.
I think his name was Ronald Reagan, and Nixon had a part in that too. But if we want to look at this brief window and say, and speaking as white American who was very much born into privilege, very much born into white America, I can tell you this: my grandparents struggled because they lived during the Depression and they lived during World War II. My parents did far, far, far better than my grandparents, and they didn't work as hard to get there. That's just a statement of fact. So here's my theory, and I'm speaking about white America because we're the ones that want to go back to the 1950s. So if you were to ask yourself, and I don't have the data to support this, but I would say, who comprises MAGA the most? It's the baby boomers,
Boomers, yeah.
Gen X,
Mhm.
and that's about as far as I would go. So that's our generation. So from my perspective, in my family history, my grandparents' lives weren't that great. Really wasn't. It was a lot of hard work, a lot of work on the farm every day, all day. Couldn't take vacations, dirt floors, outhouses, things like that, right?
Mhm.
My parents, my mom was a stay-at-home mom. We lived in luxury compared to what my grandparents had lived through. So we got this idea that every generation should do better than the previous generation.
Right.
And that stopped being a possibility, I believe, 100%, because of Reaganomics.
Yeah.
So it is the most ironic thing to me. I'm going to channel my inner Alanis Morissette, right? But I think that's why we're so angry and we're saying, let's make America great again and stuff, because we grew up with this belief that we were going to do better than our parents because our parents did better than our grandparents.
Yeah.
And we didn't do better, but it's because we were disempowered in white middle class by the very policies that we got duped into supporting and voting for. So I know we're way off track.
No, and
What do
while
you
we're
think
here,
about that, Derrick? What do you think about that?
while we're here, let me
I'm
hang
thinking
my
out
hat
loud.
on something. Lyndon Johnson said that if you convince the lowest white man that he's greater than the best black man, you could pick his pockets and he'll thank you for it. That's what Johnson said. And so this about about Reaganomics and all of that. Basically what that was picking the pockets of the average middle class white American.
Yeah.
And making them think that somehow you're better than this other group of people, right? But we're robbing you blind. And so now we're at a point where we say, okay, make America great. Now let me say this about the MAGA people. MAGA people, this is where I throw you a bone, right? Because not all of you are racist. I understand that. But some of you are, to Aaron's point, are upset because we had this standard of living that we stood on the shoulders of giants and that every generation was going to be better than the last. And so here we are, we're now boomers, this is my generation, are not living better. I was just up in Minnesota visiting my dad. And while I think that I have accomplished some very Herculean things in my life, he's got this, 2-acre spread on a pond. I'm never going to have that unless I write a best-selling book, which when we release Growing in Real Time, make sure you buy that so that me and Eric can have property on the lake.
Exactly. Next door to each other.
Exactly. Which Dude, by the way, you're one of the few people in my entire universe of people that I wouldn't mind being your neighbor. I would absolutely love to be next door to you.
Uh,
But anyway, I'll say this for all of the MAGA people that are not, diehard racists, because not everybody is. You can't paint with a broad brush. Although a paint roller or a Wagner power painter is pretty good. But the thing is that, for those of you who are not caught up in the racist part of this, you just say, hey, I want to have the two cars in the driveway and the house and the vacations and everything that my parents had or my grandparents had. I get it. But let me say this about all of that, right? Is that economic waypoints change, but economic waypoints are not. Well, let me say this. It's wrong to conflate those with freedom.
yeah.
And that's what we do. So when we don't have the economic markers of the previous generation, then we erroneously conclude that our freedoms are somehow being curtailed. Let me say this, and then I'll shut up. That economics, we're taught that economics is the science of the allocation of finite resources. Let me say that again. We're taught that economics is the science of the allocation of finite resources. What that says to the average person that really doesn't understand economics in a macro sense, that there are only so many resources available. And that in order for me to get more pie, Aaron, you have to have less pie. And so when we start talking about freedom, people say, okay, if I'm giving someone who's a minority more freedom, then that means that by definition I have to have less. Or let's get to a rubber meets the road aspect. Let's talk about our friends in the LGBTQIA plus community. That there are people that believe that giving them more rights dilutes or reduces the rights of white males. Okay. And again, if you anytime, let me just say this, that anytime you talk about anything from the standpoint of scarcity, you're going to create a culture and a model of haves and have-nots. And what I think that when we start talking about freedom, when we start talking about freedom in an absolute, concrete, not abstract sense, that we have to say that there is enough freedom for everyone to be totally free without being free at the expense of anyone else. Yeah. And that freedom extends to our rights, our responsibilities, our economic privilege, and so on and so forth. In other words, if we're going to operate as a nation from a standpoint or posture of freedom, then we have to say, okay, these things are not absolute and they're not finite. That someone else can have more rights without me curtailing mine at all. Mm-hmm. And so I really want to put that out here, because again, when we start talking about freedom, a lot of times we get hung up on this and we say, okay, if I'm giving somebody some more of something, then I by definition must have less. But if we say that the pie is infinitely expandable, now we say at that, see, let me say this, that in order for there to be true freedom, we have to see the pie as infinitely expandable. Because if we ascribe a value and say that this is like for example, I'm going to say this and I'll shut up.
You're
Like,
fine. Just jump
I'm
in.
having a Baptist close here, and I'm sorry. I want to tell you that if you understand,
I think we're going to go over tonight. Yeah, for sure.
That Bitcoin, there's only so much that's been produced. But I want to tell you that Bitcoin may be finite because someone said that Bitcoin is finite, that there is only so much Bitcoin that's going to be produced. And therefore, you can only, I say you can only get what you can get. The problem is that the rest of the world doesn't work like Bitcoin. And at that point, I will take my seat and pass the offering plate.
You got me checking my investment in Bitcoin. It's down 2% today. So I'm gonna push back just a little bit, Derrick, on the. I agree with everything you said, but here's how I perceive the problem, and I want to talk about the irony of this. And again, this is where I'm speaking to my people. Like, dude, you and I both were dyed-in-the-wool conservatives, right? But I mean, I am white America. I am.
Oh my God, you're white.
I know. It's hard for people to believe. When they were storming the Capitol, I'm literally horrified. Literally, I'm watching it in real time. I'm literally horrified, and yet part of me is like, because I'm seeing the Jesus Save signs and all this stuff, and I'm literally nodding my head and saying, "That's my people. That's my people out there doing that." And anybody can go back through the archives and see how pissed off I was about all that. But here's how I see the problem. And because again, okay, so my wife works in a public school. And I hope it's okay for me to say this. I think it probably is. Most everybody that she interacts with hates the Democrats, thinks Donald Trump won the 2020 election, and are all in to see him get reelected. And they're, but here's, and they hate the Democrats. They blame the Democrats for their socialist policies, and they're afraid of socialism and communism taking shit over. Here's the irony of it. They're being paid as government employees.
Right.
Almost everyone I know in my immediate circle in real life is a government employee in some form or fashion. There's a few that work for hospitals, but a lot of them work in the school systems. I think the school systems where I live are like the top employer. A few of them work for some foreign-owned factories that we have here. But by and large, a lot of people that are part of MAGA make their living through government jobs. So here's how I see. Now I'm going to come back to the pie illustration. The problem with the pie is that the servers of said pie, to try to work with the metaphor, yes, there's enough for everybody. Absolutely, 100%. The problem is the servers of the pie are dishing it out more and more to the same people. So from a certain perspective, absolutely 100%. We've talked about this. I wholeheartedly believe this. I think you'd have to be brain dead not to believe this, or just intellectually dishonest. Since the founding of our nation, white males have had the highest level of privilege.
Yep.
In the 1950s, it's not just it's not just the racism, it's not just the economy, it's also the misogyny. Think about the power and control you have when you're the sole breadwinner and your wife just stays at home and does all the chores and stuff that you don't want to have to do.
Yeah.
So going back to the Happy Days and Archie Bunker and Leave It to Beaver, and you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
But now here's the problem. And I believe in a free market. You can't function in a free market the way the economy is set up right now. You can't, because you cannot compete with billionaires and what they're able to do and accomplish, and then put your business. Just look at the restaurant business. At least in my community, what's happened to the restaurant business since the lockdowns in 2020 is that most of the family-owned restaurant businesses have gone out of business. It's hard for a family-owned restaurant company to compete. Oh shit! My computer was fully charged, and now it's going to die. But most of them can't compete. You got DoorDash, you got apps. So now you got to create an app, and people have to be able to order, and you know what I'm saying. And so it's hard for if I disappear, I'll come back in a few minutes. I promise. I want to get this point out. So it's hard to be an entrepreneur in this day and age. So why can't we go back to a system where the top 2% are paying a huge chunk of tax dollars to the government, and then the government is using those tax dollars not to fund the myth of American greatness through funding companies that make war machines. I don't know how else to say it. The military industrial complex, right?
Military industrial complex.
And we go back to infrastructure, and we go back to what would be wrong? What would be so bad about funding medicine for everybody so you don't have to carry insurance? Yeah. I'd get about $1,000 a month raise if I didn't have to have medical insurance.
Yeah.
People say, well, you're stealing people's money. Well, then am I stealing people's money when they're making my fucking road out here?
Exactly.
Or that.
Yeah. Or when the fire department comes.
When the fire department shows up, or the police department, or when we're defending our nation with our military.
Hallelujah.
Is that stealing money?
No.
Give me a fucking break with that shit. Okay, give me a second. I'll be right back.
Yeah, I hope you guys are enjoying this conversation, because this is really, really fundamental stuff. Listen, freedom is really fundamental. I mean, honestly, and let me say this, Aaron, I'm going to throw this out here, is that now that you're back, is that I believe that you can't really understand freedom without having a true sense of self.
Yeah, for sure.
That if you really don't understand who you are, don't understand your who, don't understand your why, you really won't ever experience freedom. And I think that part of the problem is that we don't understand our why, and we don't understand who we are. And so as a result, we assign ourselves a value based on somebody else's valuation of us. Rather than being self-valuated, right? Yeah. And if you do that, let me just say this, that if you don't see yourself as valuable simply because you are living and breathing, you see yourself as valued because you are a Republican voter, you are a Christian, you are part of this community, you are part of this HOA, whatever, you're part of this PTA. If you assign yourself a value external to yourself, my friend, you are a slave.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, believe that 100%. Because, and that's something that goes in with the psychological studies too, is like, if you don't exercise freedom, then as a general rule, you feel insecure, you have a lack of meaning and purpose and self-worth and all of that stuff. If you feel like you cannot exercise your freedom. You said something about the LGBTQ, and I'm going off the rails politically tonight.
No problem. Go for it.
Talked about abortion. So I realize the Bible has things to say about homosexuality. I'm not ignorant of that.
Right.
And I realize that it is a tenet of the Christian faith and has been.
Oh, wait, let me throw something out there before. It is what the Bible says because this is the absolute what God has to say about it, or is this because of somebody's opinion and societal norms?
Well, yeah, I mean, we can get into that part of it, but I'm trying to preface by saying I understand. I understand why this works, but because here's what I'm trying to say. I used to say, Derrick, I said on this program, they'll never overturn Roe v. Wade because that's where the Republicans get their voting currency.
Yep.
Because I know this group and they were the one issue voters. Well, I don't care. That's Obama. That's what disqualified Obama in so many people's minds, was simply that he was pro-choice.
Yep.
That was it. I don't care about all this other stuff and how great he is and how smart he is, that he's going to be our first black president. I don't care about any of that. He's pro-choice. He doesn't get my vote. So I used to say they will never overturn Roe v. Wade. And to be honest with you, I know there was a segment, I know there was a push that I think other politicians before Donald Trump were smart enough to understand that they as conservatives and Republicans were getting their voting currency from abortion.
Yep.
So while on the outside they're saying we want the pro-life vote, on the inside they're saying we love abortion because it drives people to the polls. That's what I really believe.
Yep.
And I think Trump got taken in by a certain group so that he appointed really radical far-right judges, and there was enough on the bench or whatever that they finally overturned Roe v. Wade. Now, we did a show on this. The whole abortion issue was part of the Southern strategy to put the Republicans in power by creating moral outrage on a single issue. So now, why is the LGBTQIA community in their sights? Because we have to find, if we're them, we have to find another moral issue that's going to drive people to the polls, because we can't just hang our hat on abortion.
We won the abortion issue.
So now we use that with these people to say, now we're going to go after another moral issue that is abhorrent. And we're going to convince you that the left is trying to turn your male children into females and your female children into males, which that's not that frequent or common, gang. I mean, it's just people that struggle with gender dysphoria. We're creating some gender dysphoria for sure, because the issue is front and center, but who's making the issue front and center all the time?
The right.
But we have to create that moral outrage to get the voting block out. That's what I think. That totally off of the idea of freedom, but not really, because if we're going to talk about social freedom, right, the freedom to live as you live your uniqueness within a society, then we have to look at the power brokers within that society and what their motivation is to shut down your freedoms. And it is not the people that are driving this, that the people that are voting for this in some sense are themselves being controlled. And the people that are driving it, they don't have any moral outrage about this. It's just a way to maintain and gain power in political offices so that you can vote for all kinds of policies that are going to benefit your donors.
Yep.
And that's the problem that we have.
No, and you completely nailed it. If we're going to talk about this in the context of freedom, right? It's enlightened individuals that have said, okay, because I'm one of these, and you might be, I think that you're one of these also, that I don't really like abortion. I don't like the idea of killing innocent children, but I'm not a woman.
Right.
And as long as I cannot bear children, women need to have the absolute autonomy over their own bodies. Okay. So let's take that a step further. You're talking about the LGBTQIA plus community, right? So now this has become an issue of the right and an issue by which freedoms are curtailed because enlightened, and I won't even say, let me say this for me, I'm a leftist. I'm almost a fucking communist. That's me. I'm not going to speak for you on that part. But the thing about sexual autonomy, sexual freedom.
Oh, let's get into that.
No, basically, I'm glad that you that you said cool with that. But the whole thing is that sexual autonomy simply says that I'm willing as a voice that has a sphere of social influence, that I'm willing to lend my voice to those who struggle with sexual autonomy. Now, though, basically, there are people who want to curtail that, and they want to do it under the cloak of religious religious constraint.
Yeah, religious constraint, sure.
Okay. My thing is that who you sleep with, who you're attracted to, who you choose to date, who you choose to marry, has absolutely no bearing on my life. So therefore, I'm willing to give myself as an ally in this cause, because I believe that you should have the freedom to choose who it is that you love, who you sleep with, who you choose to have a relationship with, whatever, right? That is the thing. So to your point, Aaron, what you were saying is that the right, now that they have completely scored on Roe v. Wade, they've completely scored. It was a from the top of the key, Michael Jordan leg spread, free throw, down, dunk. Okay. But now they're trying to figure out how to achieve the same 10-10-10 judges scorecard on sexuality.
Yeah. The problem is the freedoms that are being inhibited are not just sexual. That's the problem with the right and with the church, is that they want to make it all about sex. Because your sexual orientation,
come on, man.
How do I say this? Like, we make it about sexual orientation. It's not about who you want to have sex with. It's about who you want to spend your life with and love. And are you entitled to the same liberties? So take gay marriage, for example. Am I entitled to the same rights and privileges as any other spouse if I marry someone of the same sex as if I marry someone of the opposite? That has absolutely nothing to do whatsoever with what you do in the bedroom. Nothing at all. It's how you present in society. Am I safe and I'm very much a heterosexual cis male, but if I were a homosexual male, am I safe to go out with my partner and hold hands? If I'm a homosexual woman, am I safe to walk into a place holding hands with my partner? If I have gender dysphoria, am I safe to present myself in society as a gender that is different than the one I was given at birth? We want to make it about sex. It's not about sex. It's about the freedom to present yourself freely in a society and to be able to move around safely in that society and to be afforded the same rights and privileges. Now, I want to stress this one step. I'm going to take this one step further because I think this perfectly illustrates the point about having freedom to express your unique self. And this is probably going to get us banned from YouTube. So if you don't want me to, if you want me to stop right now,
No, go ahead, man. Go ahead.
no, I'm serious. It might get us
No,
banned.
serious. Let it rip.
The argument from the church is if we allow adults to have, if we allow homosexuals to give into their sexual urges, keeping the focus on sex, not love, not relationship, not social presentation, not safety and freedom, because those are the real issues to me. We're going to focus on what you're doing in the bedroom. All right. Mm-hmm. So we're going to focus on that. And you're saying you have these urges, you have these desires, and you should be free to express those. And then they always go here. Then where do we draw the line? Because if someone is interested in that way, I'm going to choose my words carefully so we don't get shadow banned. If someone is interested in a person under the age of 18 in that same way, then what's to say they can't use the same argument that you make? In other words, Aaron, Derrick, if you're saying people should be free to express their unique self, then why can't that group of people, I hope everybody is catching who we're talking about here, why can't that group of people that have those urges be allowed to act on those urges as well and be afforded the same freedoms? And here's the clear-cut answer. The data, the evidence is so overwhelming. It's not even debatable that the younger you are introduced to those things, activities, the more harm and damage emotionally, psychologically, and to your development as a human being is done. Unequivocally. There's no question about it. There is no data. In fact, the data goes the other direction. When a person's, let's say, brain is fully developed, you know, they're in their late teens, early 20s, and they engage in sexual activities that are consensual with other people at the same level of development. You can have a 20-year age gap, no problem.
Yeah.
You have a 30-year age gap, no problem. You have a 20-year-old with a 50-year-old. That 20-year-old is not going to experience the same psychological, mental, and emotional damage as, say, a 12-year-old would, or an 8-year-old, or a 5-year-old. The younger you go, the more damaging it is. Right. So it's simple. It's not complex. Now, they'll say, well, I mean, so the data goes the other way. So if I have a orientation that I am not allowed to express and I cannot present myself in society, guess what? Psychological damage, emotional damage, become suicidal, become depressed, become anxious. It's not hard. And I'm tired of hearing that argument. And, you know, it's such a taboo topic. You hate to even mention it because even that's become political in this environment that we live in. But I hate that argument when they say, well, if we allow this, then this other group over here gets to do their thing. No, that actually proves the point. That you are free to express your uniqueness to the degree that you don't do harm to someone else.
Exactly.
And this group of people, if they act on those desires to this group of people, unequivocally, you're damaging this group of people. And therefore, it should be against the law.
So I've heard this argument, and we're down this rabbit hole.
Sorry.
No, it's funny. That, you know, I say if you allow gay marriage and you allow that, you know, you normalize homosexual relationships, then you have to normalize pedophilia, right? That's one of the arguments. But okay, so
you said the word. I was trying to avoid it.
Sorry, man, I said it.
Go ahead.
but here's the thing that if you are a heterosexual man, a cis male, and you say, okay, my attraction is to prepubescent girls. Okay, so you're saying what the logic of the right is that if I allow homosexual relationships, then I open the door to this also. But here, and this is the I'm like Sir Mix-a-Lot. I like big butts, and I cannot lie. The problem is that it's not the same thing. If you're if you're attracted, if you're an adult attracted to a child, irrespective of sexual orientation, you are a fucked up person. Period. Full stop. So it doesn't matter whether it's same sex or whether it's different sex. It doesn't matter. And it's funny. Like there has been legislation at state level. I think in 8 states where there have been bills brought to the state legislature forbidding child marriages. In other words, forbidding marriages of prepubescent children, of girls, with, excuse me, with adult males. And 100% of Republicans have opposed this legislation. Help me to understand. And again, we're talking about freedom, right? So your freedom to exercise your sexuality. Now we're talking about heterosexual cis male sexuality. What you as a Republican, as a conservative male, are basically codifying sexual relations with underage minor girls. And how do you support that? In what universe does this represent freedom? That's that's the question. So to tie that to our topic tonight, in what universe does this get tied to freedom? It doesn't. It can't.
Yeah. I think we value consent among adults because children can't give consent in those situations. It's not even a thing. We value consent with adults. You brought up sexual autonomy. We value consent because it's probably one of the most God, what's the word I want to use? Well, obviously it's very personal, right? It's very intimate. It's very, I think, sacred. But I'm using that in a non-religious sense. And so you should have the autonomy. Let me say it this way. So we value consent, right? We don't want to take consent away from someone in a situation of assault or, again, I'm trying to stay away from those social media trigger words, the R word. And yet, aren't we taking away consent? Isn't it, don't we equally violate sexual autonomy when we regulate and legislate who or how many people in a consenting adult situation that a person can express themselves sexually with? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Isn't that kind of the same thing? Because we're taking away their ability. If someone forces themselves on someone else, the person who is having that done to them has their consent taken away from them. The person who wants to act in a way that maybe isn't the hetero monogamous norm, aren't they also having their consent taken away? Do you see what I'm saying? I mean, It's not the same. It's not the same.
Not the same,
but it's similar.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe we should shut this down, Derrick. Maybe we're just going too far down the rabbit hole, or maybe I am. I don't know.
No, I'm going to say this because Maya had posted this. She said Oberfeld versus Hodges, 2015, that they're going to attack this case next. And so I put the link up here in case anybody wants to drill down into that. And the only reason why I put this up there for 2 reasons. One is that, Maya is my future wife, and so I absolutely value her opinion. But she also happens to be a family law attorney. Mm-hmm. So, she said that this is something that the conservatives are going to attack next. And again, the whole slippery slope context is something. God, on the one hand, you say, okay, slippery slope says that they can go after this, or they can pursue this next. But the slippery slope also says that there is something like, okay, so here's another one, the Loving, what is it, Loving versus Virginia case of 1967 about interracial marriage. And this is so funny because when Oberfell was mentioned, Loving was also mentioned. And here is Clarence Thomas, a Supreme Court Justice of the United States, who is a black man married to a white woman. In
Yeah.
other words, he could actually rule over a decision that would invalidate his own marriage. And it blows my mind that, that the whole thing behind the Loving decision is that people are free to love and marry whom they wish. But again, you have justices like Clarence Thomas, who apparently are myopic concerning the law, that they might wind up executing a decision that invalidates their own marriage. What am I getting at? Let me say this, and then I'm going to shut up, and we can land the plane.
Yeah.
Again, freedom is the ability to express yourself in terms of thought, word, or action, insofar as you don't cause harm to anyone else. And again, when we look at legislation, when we look at bodily autonomy for women, when we look at LGBTQIA, when we look at interracial relationships, in what context do any of these cause harm to anyone else? And if they don't, then they should be allowed the freedom to exist in a legislative or a legal context without opposition. Because again, it's without harm. That's the clause I want to focus on, without harm. If I'm doing something like, let's say I want to, not me. Let's say someone wants to have sex with underage children. That is something that we know.
That would have been a horrible clip.
I had to clean that one up, man.
Yeah,
because I don't.
I just want to highlight that.
But anyone who wants to have relations with underage children, we know empirically that causes harm
Exactly.
to the underage child. We know that. We have tons of evidence, tons of case studies that prove that this is harmful. Okay, so if we know that that's harmful, we know that that's something that we can't legislate in favor of because it will cause harm. Okay, so again, when we look at legislation, when we look at how freedom is expressed, we have to ask ourselves the salient question: does this, even though this liberates me to do something, does this cause harm to anyone else? And if it does, if it causes harm to one, it's one too many. And that's where I'll stop.
No, I think that's a great place to sort of land the plane. I mean, it's an unfortunate illustration. It's that it even exists, right? But it really brings out the new. I mean, it's a really great example of what we've been talking about. You should be free to express your own uniqueness to the degree that it doesn't cause harm to someone else or to another group of people.
Yep.
Now, that argument can also be flipped the other way for people that are pro-life. Well, you don't have the choice or autonomy over your body because you're causing harm to another person by aborting the baby. So even that stuff needs to be nuanced. But I just think it's a great discussion. I mean, the other thing that we do though in political discussions or these types of things, religious discussions, is we always go to the outlier too. Like we
Yep.
always go to the most extreme, you know. The vast majority, well, I like to believe this. I still like to believe this. I might even need to believe this. And I may be completely wrong. And I'm saying this sincerely.
Yeah.
I may
Yeah.
be empirically, objectively, completely wrong. And I'm recognizing I still need to believe this. I do believe that most people are good, decent people. I
Me
think
too.
we get hijacked by a lot of other people's agendas. You know what I mean? But I think when we're talking, especially in our program, especially with our audience, especially with our community, we're talking common sense to people who are not going to abuse their freedoms or get stuck, as we said in the beginning, in self-absorption or self-abnegation. So I think we need to get back to one of the things I love about what we do. We just happen to agree on most stuff. But I think we model healthy discourse and healthy dialogue because we got to get back to that. We got to get back to talking to each other. You know, and I heard who was it that Bill Maher said recently? I heard him say recently, you can hate the other guy, the former guy. You can hate Trump. You can hate Donald Trump, but you can't hate everybody who supports or voted for Donald Trump, and you can't hate half the country.
Right.
And I think if we could understand, maybe we could do one next week, a follow up on how AI and algorithms really do keep people in a bubble so that they don't get the facts. And you and I, we're fact checkers, man. I mean,
Yep.
you know, we just think that way. We're critical thinkers, but not everybody is. And so we can't make the assumption. I'm just saying in general, not you and me. I'm saying in general, as like, don't make the assumption that the average Trump voter or supporter has access to all the facts, because more than likely they probably don't.
Nope.
And I probably don't have access to all the facts on what's happening on the left or in the Democratic Party. I'm quite sure I don't.
Yep.
And so if we could sit down and have dialogue again and talk to each other and listen to one another.
So let me say this about that, because you brought up a really good point. You know, that we do need civil discourse.
Yep.
We absolutely need that. Here's the problem is, and again, where what I think separates you and I from, and I'm going to sound a little elitist at this, but what separates you and I from the rest of everyone else is that we are willing to say, okay, I might be wrong about this. I may not have all the facts. I may not have all the information. Okay. So if you present something with me that represents a superior factual position to what I've held, then I'm willing to let go of what I know to embrace what you're sharing, or at least to consider it. Right. That's the problem is people are galvanized in their thinking. They're galvanized in their beliefs. And once you become galvanized, and I say this to everyone that's listening, go look up the word galvanized. What does that mean? Because the simplistic definition is, if you galvanize a nail, when you're doing roofing or siding on a house, so that rust does not inhibit the nail's ability to hold something in place. That is the technical definition of galvanization. But when you become galvanized in a position, what you're saying is that I am creating an inertness in my thinking, in my beliefs, so that nothing outside of what I think or what I believe can get in. Now, once you become galvanized in your thinking, in your belief, in your ideology, in your philosophy, in your theology, you're saying that now I will not allow an external thought to compromise what I believe. And when you do that, let me just say this in the context of what we're talking about. And once you become galvanized like that, you are a slave, my friend.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep. That's probably a good place to land the plane, huh?
Yeah, I think so. Uh, there's not a whole shit ton of comments out here.
Yeah, I noticed that. It's really, really quiet tonight.
Yeah, I mean the number of views is pretty solid, but the number of people that are commenting, I think that people are just kind of enjoying the conversation.
Yeah.
And I already mentioned what May had said about Oberfell versus Hodges, and I put a link to that. And
Yeah, I looked at that. Oh yeah, absolutely. That's, if not next on the list, it's in the top 5, I'm sure.
So what were we talking about? Like for next week, we're talking about AI.
I think because here's just to give people a preview for it. So I've been noticing this, and it's driving me crazy. Like probably what I use more than anything else to get information. I want to stress this to people. I do not use Twitter. I refuse to call it X to put out any information. It's just weird to me. I'm just, I'm galvanized.
I'm with you on that. I'm with you on that. I still type twitter.com.
And then I use YouTube a lot. And I've really noticed this on YouTube lately. That if I watch 1 or 2 videos on a particular topic, I get flooded with nothing but videos on that particular topic. So if I depend strictly on my scrolling to see what's out there on YouTube, I am getting a very thin slice of the pie in terms of information that's out there. But now here's the other thing. If like, let's say you and I differ on an issue, and the algorithms and AIs have picked up on our patterns, and let's say we differ on, abortion, and let's say that I'm pro-life, which I'm not. I believe in choice, but let's just say, for the sake of argument, I'm pro-life, you're pro-choice, and it's a video that has, let's say, 2,000, 3,000 comments on it, right?
Yep.
As soon as I open up the comments, all the comments I'm going to be seeing are going to be supporting my point of view.
Yeah.
You can watch the video at the same time, open it up on your device, and all the comments are going to be supporting your point of view.
Mm.
You're not even going to be exposed to the counter arguments. And as this thing develops and as it gets more sophisticated, and as they're able to read our facial expressions, if you don't think that they're not listening all the time and watching all the time, then explain to me facial recognition. Open your phone and explain to me, hey, I don't want to say it. Hey, Alexa. Explain to me how that works. Oh, it just kicks on when it just hears this. Well, how does it hear it if it's not listening? Anyway, I digress. So how will the advancements in algorithms and AI and social media impact our ability to be free thinkers and thus become a hindrance to our personal freedom in the future? And what do we do about it?
So just as a prelude to next week, I would say this, like, because people accuse me, and I'm sure you get this too, of creating an echo chamber. You know, you only want to hear your side of the story, but that's not the way that I am. It's like I couch arguments from opposing views, but what I won't do is I won't engage in a protracted argument with those people. And when it comes insofar as supporting the algorithm, you know, AI with YouTube is concerned, I look at a lot of content that's contrary to my point of view, because I want to know what the opposition is saying.
But you have to be intentional about that, is the point that I'm making.
Right.
You have to be intentional about finding that information, because if you're not, you just keep seeing everything that agrees with you. You know what I mean? Just because of the algorithms. Oh, they're interested in this, so we're going to give them more of that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So anyway, I think that would be interesting to discuss. That's what I propose for next week.
Okay.
Maybe.
All right. I'm with it. I'm with it. We'll etch that in stone.
Derrick, I love you, man. I love being able to have these conversations. Everybody out there, thank you so much for participating and watching and supporting us, and be looking forward to our book in the next few months. I'd say next 4 to 6 months we'll have it out. And
I would say 3 to 4, depending on how quickly you go through it. And
yeah, 3 to 4. That's perfect. You've published books before. I haven't, so you would be a better authority and expert on this.
So let me just say this. I'm going to put this out here because we have growing in real time that we're doing, right. You and we're going to circle back here, and we're going to take your content and get you a book out there. And then I also have my next one is Deconstructing Religion Part 2. I want, when I used to be on the Heretic Happy Hour podcast, I used to always say I wanted to call the sequel to my book Deconstructing Religion 2, Burn That Shit to the Ground. But I've taken a little bit more tempered stance in that, we all believe differently, and that's okay. It's okay.
Okay. Thanks everybody for coming to our TED Talk, for growing with us in real time. And we really do. We grow in real time. I mean, there's some stuff I want to go back and dig into a little bit more from tonight's discussion. So thank you, Derrick. I love you, man.
Love you too, man.
Peace out.
Adios, y'all. And that means go with